The person who commits an act of extremist violence is not born believing what they believe. They do not wake up one morning transformed. There's a path, a sequence of psychological shifts so gradual that each step feels rational. Each new belief feels like revelation rather than indoctrination. And the most terrifying aspect of radicalization is not that it happens to broken or stupid people. It happens to people who are searching for exactly what you are searching for right now: meaning, purpose, belonging, and the feeling that their life matters in a world that often suggests it does not. Imagine you're lonely, not dramatically, so just the ambient isolation of modern life. You spend hours online because that is where connection happens now. You stumble into a community that shares your frustrations about the state of the world. They are articulate, passionate, welcoming. They see things other people miss. They offer explanations that make the chaos feel comprehensible. You start spending more time there. The explanations get more complex, more totalizing. The enemies get more clearly defined. And somewhere in the slow accumulation of new ideas, new language, new loyalties, you cross a line you did not know existed. By the time you realize how far you have traveled from who you used to be, the journey back feels impossible. This is not a hypothetical. This is happening to thousands of people every single day. Radicalization is not a light switch. It is a dimmer. The descent into extremist ideology happens through incremental shifts in perception, social affiliation, and identity that compound over time until the person occupying the extreme position can no longer recognize how they arrived there. Understanding this process is not an academic exercise. It is a matter of recognizing one of the most consequential psychological phenomena of our time, one that transforms ordinary individuals into participants in violence, that fractures families, that destabilizes societies, and that operates through mechanisms so subtle that both the radicalized and those trying to prevent radicalization often fail to see it until it is far too late. The research literature on radicalization has expanded dramatically over the past 2 decades, driven by the urgent need to understand how people come to embrace ideologies that justify harm to others. What emerges from this research is not a single pathway, but a set of common psychological and social dynamics that appear across different forms of extremism, whether religious, political, or ideological. The specific content varies. The structure remains remarkably consistent. Clark Macaulay and Sofia Moskalenko, psychologists who have studied political radicalization extensively, describe it as a process of increasing extremity in beliefs, feelings, and behaviors in support of intergroup conflict. This definition is crucial because it shifts focus from the endpoint to the trajectory. Radicalization is not defined by where you end up, but by the movement toward more extreme positions and the willingness to act on those positions in ways that violate previous moral constraints. The journey typically begins with a grievance. This could be personal or collective, real or perceived, but must feel significant. Someone experiences injustice, humiliation, loss, or marginalization. The experience creates what psychologists call cognitive opening, a state of psychological receptivity to new worldviews. When your existing framework for understanding the world fails to make sense of your suffering, you become hungry for alternative explanations. This is not irrationality. This is the mind seeking coherence in the face of distressing confusion. Into this opening steps an ideology that offers clarity. It provides a framework that explains why you are suffering and identifies who is responsible. The explanation is usually simplistic in the sense that it reduces complex social economic, and political dynamics to a clear narrative of good and bad actors. But simplicity is not a weakness when you're drowning in ambiguity. It is a lifeline. The ideology says your suffering is not random. It is not your fault. It is the result of deliberate actions by a specific group of people who benefit from your oppression. This narrative is psychologically powerful because it transforms pain into purpose. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a target of injustice. And that reframing creates the possibility of agency. The ideology is usually delivered through a community rather than abstract texts. You do not typically read your way into extremism in isolation. You're introduced to ideas through people who embody them, who make the ideology feel lived and real rather than theoretical. This is where social identity theory becomes critical to understanding radicalization. Henri Tajfel's work demonstrated that humans derive significant portions of their self-concept from group membership. We are not just individuals. We are members of teams, tribes, nations, religions, political movements, and we are neurologically wired to favor our in-groups and to view out-groups with suspicion or hostility. Extremist communities exploit this wiring by offering powerful group identities to people who feel unmoored. You are not just a random person struggling with personal problems. You are part of a vanguard, a resistance, a chosen group with special knowledge and moral clarity. The community provides immediate social rewards. You are welcomed, valued, given status and purpose. The dopamine hit of belonging is neurologically real and psychologically addictive, especially for people who have been isolated or marginalized. As you spend more time in the community, a process called encapsulation begins. Your social world starts to contract. You spend less time with people outside the group and more time with people inside it. This is rarely forced initially. It happens organically because the community is where you feel understood, where conversations are meaningful, where you're not dismissed or ridiculed. But the effect is that your information environment becomes increasingly homogeneous. You're exposed primarily to perspectives that reinforce the group ideology and insulated from perspectives that might challenge it. This creates an epistemic bubble, a term coined by philosopher C. T. Nguyen to describe informational environments where alternative viewpoints are simply absent. Rather than explicitly rejected, you're not actively refusing to consider other perspectives. You're just not encountering them anymore. And because the human mind calibrates its sense of what is normal based on what it regularly encounters, your perception of mainstream versus extreme begins to shift. What once seemed radical starts to feel reasonable because everyone around you treats it as reasonable. Simultaneously, the community begins a process of othering, systematically dehumanizing the designated enemy group. This happens through language, narratives, and selective attention to information that confirms the enemy's malevolence, while ignoring information that complicates that picture. The outgroup is portrayed not just as wrong, but as fundamentally different, less human, less deserving of moral consideration. Psychological research on dehumanization shows that once a group is perceived as subhuman, the normal moral prohibitions against harming them weaken dramatically. You can do things to them that you would never do to someone you recognized as fully human. The ideology provides what R.E. Kruglansky calls a need for cognitive closure, the desire for definite answers rather than ambiguity. People vary in how much cognitive closure they need, but everyone experiences heightened need during periods of uncertainty or threat. Extremist ideologies excel at providing closure. They offer comprehensive explanations, clear moral frameworks, and unambiguous prescriptions for action. There is no maybe, no depends, no we need more information. There is only the truth as the ideology defines it and the lie, as perpetuated by everyone else. This is where sacred values enter the equation. When beliefs become sacralized, they are removed from the domain of rational cost-benefit analysis. You do not negotiate with sacred values. You do not compromise them for practical advantage. Research by Scott Atran on sacred values and conflict shows that attempts to incentivize people to abandon sacralized beliefs often backfire, making them more committed rather than less. The belief becomes part of identity in a way that makes questioning it feel like self-destruction. As the ideology deepens its grip, moral disengagement mechanisms activate. Albert Bandura identified several cognitive mechanisms by which people can commit harmful acts without experiencing debilitating guilt. Moral justification reframes violence as serving a higher purpose. Euphemistic labeling uses sanitized language to obscure the harm being done. Displacement of responsibility shifts accountability to leaders or circumstances. Dehumanization, as mentioned earlier, removes the victim from the scope of moral consideration. These mechanisms do not require conscious manipulation. They emerge naturally when the ideological framework makes violence seem necessary and righteous. The pathway from belief to action is not automatic. Most people who hold extreme beliefs never act violently. But certain psychological factors increase the likelihood of behavioral escalation. One is personal crisis, a job loss, relationship breakdown, health problem, or other significant stressor can create what researchers call a precipitating event that pushes someone from passive belief to active participation. The crisis intensifies emotional arousal, narrows cognitive focus, and creates urgency that overrides hesitation. Another factor is in-group competition for status. Within extremist communities, there are hierarchies of commitment and purity, demonstrating willingness to take risks, to sacrifice, to act on the ideology. Invisible ways earns respect and status. This creates pressure to escalate. If you want to be seen as a true believer, as someone serious rather than someone just talking, you have to do something that proves it. The specific action matters less than its function as a signal of commitment to the group. Social proof also plays a role. When others in the community engage in or endorse extreme actions, it normalizes that behavior. If people you respect are doing it, it becomes thinkable. If the community celebrates it, it becomes desirable. This is how individuals who would never independently arrive at violence as a solution can be brought to participate in collective violence. The decision is outsourced to the group. You are not deciding whether this is right. You are deciding whether to be part of the group, and the group has already decided. The internet has fundamentally altered the landscape of by removing geographic constraints and accelerating social processes that used to take months or years. You can now find an extremist community for virtually any grievance within minutes of searching. You can go from casual browsing to immersive participation without ever leaving your bedroom. Algorithmic recommendation systems designed to maximize engagement inadvertently create radicalization pipelines by suggesting increasingly extreme content to people who show interest in a topic. Watch one video questioning mainstream narratives, and the algorithm will serve you dozens more each, slightly more extreme than the last, creating the impression of a coherent alternative worldview supported by countless voices. Online radicalization also enables what researchers call lone wolf terrorism, where individuals radicalize in relative isolation, consuming extremist content and planning attacks without formal membership in organized groups. This makes detection and prevention extraordinarily difficult. There are no meetings to infiltrate, no communications to intercept, No organizational hierarchy to disrupt. Just an individual, often young and male, consuming ideology, alone and emerging to commit violence that shocks a community that never saw it coming. But the psychological dynamics are the same whether radicalization happens online or in person. The core elements remain constant. A grievance that creates cognitive opening. An ideology that offers explanation and purpose. A community that provides belonging and identity. A process of encapsulation that narrows. Information exposure. Mechanisms of dehumanization that make violence thinkable. And social or psychological triggers that push from belief to action. What makes radicalization particularly difficult to counter is that many of the psychological needs it fulfills are legitimate and healthy. The desire for meaning, for community, for moral clarity, for agency. In shaping the world, these are not pathological impulses. They are fundamental human needs. Extremist groups succeed because they meet those needs more effectively than mainstream institutions for many people. Telling someone their beliefs are crazy does not address the underlying hunger that made those beliefs attractive. It just confirms the extremist narrative that outsiders do not understand and cannot be trusted. Effective deradicalization, the limited research suggests, requires offering alternative pathways to meet the same needs. This means providing belonging in non-extremist communities, restoring social connections that were severed during radicalization, helping individuals develop more complex and nuanced understandings of the issues they care about, and most critically, allowing them to exit the extremist identity without destroying their entire sense of self. People do not easily abandon identities they have invested heavily in. They need bridges, not ultimatums. The families of radicalized individuals face an impossible situation. Confronting the person directly often strengthens their commitment because it activates the ideologies. Predictions about persecution. Staying silent feels like complicity. There is no playbook that works reliably because each case is embedded in unique relational and psychological contexts. What the research does suggest is that maintaining connection, however strained, is crucial. The moment you sever the relationship entirely, you remove any possibility of influence. The person is left with only the extremist community, which will reinforce every grievance and deepen every commitment. Societies face similar dilemmas at scale. Suppressing extremist speech can drive it underground, where it is harder to monitor and can create martyrdom narratives that strengthen recruitment, allowing it to flourish. Unchallenged normalizes ideas that lead to violence. Focusing resources on surveillance and prosecution addresses symptoms but not causes. Addressing root causes like inequality, marginalization, and social fragmentation is necessary, but operates on timescales that do not prevent immediate threats. There are no clean solutions, only difficult trade-offs between competing values and uncertain outcomes. What should unsettle you most is not that radicalization happens to other people in other communities with other grievances. It is how easily the psychological mechanisms could activate in your own life. You are not immune because you are educated or because you consider yourself rational. The engineers and doctors who joined ISIS were educated. The programmers and professionals who participate in domestic extremist movements are rational in most domains of their lives. Intelligence and education do not protect against radicalization. They change the form it takes and the sophistication of the rationalizations, but they do not prevent it. You have grievances. Everyone does. You have moments of isolation, of feeling unheard, of watching the world move in directions that disturb you. You have encountered communities online that share your concerns, that make you feel less alone. You have probably drifted toward more extreme versions of beliefs you already held because the people articulating those versions seemed insightful and passionate. These are the early stages. The door is always closer than you think. The difference between casual engagement with political content and radicalization is not a difference in kind but in degree. It is a matter of how far you travel down a path that has no clear markers warning you that you're entering dangerous territory. The ideology does not announce itself as extremist. It presents itself as truth finally spoken, as courage to see what others deny, as moral clarity in a confused world. And if you're in the right psychological state, if the conditions align, if the community is compelling enough, you will walk through that door believing you are walking toward enlightenment when you are actually walking toward a prison of certainty that will cost you more than you can currently imagine. Radicalization does not feel like descent. It feels like awakening. Every step toward extremism is experienced as a step toward truth, toward purpose, toward becoming the person you were meant to be. The psychological machinery that transforms ordinary people into extremists is the same machinery that helps you form friendships, find meaning, and navigate moral complexity. It is not a bug in human psychology. It is a feature that can be weaponized, and the only protection is recognizing that you are vulnerable, that the door is always open, that certainty is not wisdom, and belonging is not truth. You are not too smart for this. You are exactly smart enough to rationalize your way into believing anything if the conditions are right. If this exploration of how minds are captured disturbed you, share it with someone who is certain they could never be radicalized. Subscribe for more investigations into the psychological vulnerabilities we all carry, and examine your own beliefs. Honestly, which communities are you part of that discourage questions? Which ideologies are you defending more vigorously than the evidence warrants? Or has your information environment become so narrow that you no longer encounter genuine challenges to your worldview? The first step of radicalization is believing you are immune to it. The first step away is admitting you are not.